Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This morning I'm going to be talking to you about a partner-led evaluation of the KNOWFOR program, which started in 2015. And my name is Jess Dart. I'm from Clear Horizon Consulting. We're an Australian-based company who were the evaluation facilitator. I'll tell you about my role a little later. Okay, so what I'll be doing in this presentation is introducing the KNOWFOR program, telling you a little bit about that, then describing the partner-led evaluation approach which was taken, which is quite an unusual approach. I'll describe the underpinning methodology, which is called the collaborative outcomes reporting, and I'll end with reflecting on some challenges and learnings. Okay, so the KNOWFOR evaluation. First of all, I'll tell you a bit about the program. So it was funded by the UK aid program between 2012 and 2017 to the tune of £38 million. That's a complicated program because it was implemented through 3 global partners who are all quite different in many ways. Now, the 3 global partners, you see the logos on the bottom. Well, obviously the funder, who I've already mentioned, UK aid program, and then there were 3 organisations who work in the forestry sector. So firstly there is CFOR, which stands for the Centre for International Forestry Research. Then there was IUCN, which stands for the International Union for Conservation of Nature, and then the World Bank's Programme on Forests. So that was funded through these 3 partners who implemented the programme. The aim of the programme was to equip policymakers and practitioners in developing countries with strategic knowledge, comparable evidence, reliable tools, systematic analysis on forest, trees and climate. Okay, now you can see the countries where the programme worked. So it was a global program working across quite a number of countries, and it actually operated at different levels. It operated at the regional level, sometimes just a country, and then right down to sub country levels, to sort of sub-district levels. It was backed by a theory of change, which I won't go into in detail, other than to note that there are sort of 2 components to it. You'll note in the dark blue, this is the more traditional component, whereby we describe how the KNOWFOR partnership, the 3 partners, worked to make sure that knowledge uptake occurred and create targeted forest knowledge products through either directly or indirectly through intermediary to equip decision makers to bring about changes in policy and practice. There's also this light blue element to the theory of change, which was actually about the way the partners worked internally and to develop appropriate approaches for planning and doing monitoring and evaluation, and to really focus on identifying who the users of the knowledge were. So there's some internal aspect to the theory of change that was expecting to lead to change in the way those 3 partners did business. Okay, so now I'll talk about the evaluation. So we think it was a fairly unique approach in the sense that it was what we call a partner-led evaluation. So what that means is the 3 partners, that's IUCN, CFOR and World Bank, they actually collected all the data and did the analysis. And this was supported by the evaluation facilitator. That was us actually, Clear Horizon Consulting. So we provided things like templates and support on the phone and coaching. We facilitated workshops, and also we actually were responsible for pulling the final report together, but it was based very much on the inputs of the partners. So to add some rigor into this, we also had a external quality assurer. That was ODI. The Overseas Development Institute. So they scrutinised the process, and they scrutinised the actual products of the evaluation at different points. Now you might be wondering why we chose this slightly unusual approach, because more normally it will be done by an external evaluator. So in this case, there was quite a long journey that sort of came before the evaluation, which I'll explain to you shortly. But in summary, we'd already done a lot of work on the monitoring and evaluation framework. We collaborated together and co-designed the monitoring and evaluation framework. We were quite keen to use that, and didn't really want to bring in an extra person. It's a very complex program. It takes a long time to understand. It's not just understanding how one organization works, but how three work, and the delicate balance of the partnership between the three. So they're quite keen to use this partner-led approach because they wanted to continue the strong work in M&E, which had a very strong learning focus, and they believed that they would learn more from this approach. And secondly, they didn't want to waste time bringing in an external evaluator to explain how the whole thing worked again. So we had 3 evaluation questions which framed this evaluation, the first one being the most important. So the first one was, how and to what extent did KNOWFOR contribute to equipping decision makers and intermediaries, and what lessons can be drawn from this? So this was all about, I guess, what difference the KNOWFOR program made. And we put most of our evaluation energy into this first question, but there were also 2 other questions, which were about the influence KNOWFOR had on how partners undertake their core business. That was from the second part, the theory of change, the light blue part. And then finally, there was one about how the KNOWFOR approach itself and the management processes, how effective they were, relevant, and whether they provided value for money. But as I say, most of the work went into the first question. Now, these 3 questions framed the planning, the evaluation planning, and they ultimately were what we reported on in the final report. So there was an underpinning approach. So the whole evaluation approach was drawn to a certain extent on this technique called collaborative outcomes reporting. So collaborative outcomes reporting, or CORE as we call it, was developed by myself, and it draws quite heavily on John Main's contribution analysis. It was developed back in about 2010. It's about 7 or 8 years old, and it was largely developed through the work that we did in Australia in the natural resource management sector. It was picked up by the Commonwealth Government and used to evaluate a lot of the national biodiversity and conservation programs here in Australia. So the aim of this approach is to pull all the data together that you have, and new data, to tell a story of the program, to tell the story of what was done and how it led to outcomes. We call that a performance story. It's very much about effectiveness, if you like. Now, collaborative outcomes reporting is also a collaborative approach, and it's also a theory-based approach. So by collaborative, there are sense-making workshops in it where people get together, look at the data, and determine what the findings are. So it's not done by an external evaluator, it's done by an evaluation facilitator. It's also theory-based in the fact that we start with a theory of change. We test that theory of change during the evaluation. We look to see whether the intermediate outcomes have occurred, and we test the assumptions. And so ultimately, this technique, it's about understanding the contribution of the program by mapping what you expect to see happen in the intermediate outcomes with what actually did happen. And we do use this big scary table, which we call a results chart, which is a data synthesis tool. So it has certain sort of types of products and artifacts in it. Now, in collaborative outcomes reporting, there is also an independent verification aspect to it. Now, normally in CORE, this is done through an expert panel who are objective and have no vested interest in the program, and they look at the findings and they create a contribution statement. In CORE, we were lucky that we had an external quality assurer all the way through the program, and they looked at the plans, they looked at the products, and they assessed the strength of evidence. Okay, in terms of timeline, sort of have to wind it back a little bit and see how it all began. So this grey box number 1 talks about the planning. So this was really about the planning of the monitoring and evaluation framework. We call it DMEL, which is Design, Monitoring, Evaluation and Learning. So back in 2013, the program was reviewed, and it got a fairly negative review for monitoring and evaluation. And because of that, the program reached out and looked for a monitoring and evaluation contractor to help them. That was when we got involved, 2013, Clear Horizon, and we provided some support to co-design what we call a DMEL framework, which is design, monitoring, evaluation and learning. And so over in number 2 here, they started, partners to July 2014, began to implement the DMEL framework with support from us. And the good thing was then we got encouragement at that point, because the next annual review was a massive improvement. I think we got an A for that. And then the partners established a community of practice around monitoring and evaluation. And there was quite a lot of collaboration between the 3 partners in the design of the DMEL framework. It was a point at which they came together and it was co-designed. Okay, so the actual evaluation itself didn't start till January 2016, but it's important to note that it really built on the M&E work that had come before. So it wasn't until the scoping started in 2016. It took quite a long time to agree on the scope and the terms of reference. This is one of the issues with a partner-led evaluation. The quality assurer was started in September 2016, and we did sense-making workshops in each country around about February, and then in March there was this big summit workshop in London, and we finally agreed on the evaluation, ended in about October. Okay, so it took about over a year. So this is the methodology. This first column here just shows the core process, and then sort of described what the outputs were for this particular evaluation. So course generally starts with a co-design workshop to agree on the theory of change, the evaluation questions, to develop an evaluation plan, which is then used. In this case of KNOWFOR, we already had a theory of change, but we did develop the evaluation questions together. And then there were plans that every organisation had its own evaluation plan, and then we had an overarching evaluation plan as well. And then we went out and we started, in the discover phase, we started to collate all the outputs from the program and all of the data products that we had collected through the M&E system. And we put that all into a data synthesis tool called the results chart. But we also did some primary data collection in which the partners did case studies. So there were 9 deep dive case studies, 3 each, as well as some other things. So the next phase was to interpret the findings. So we took these data artifacts together in workshops and looked at them, examined them, and developed key findings out of them. We also rated the strength of evidence of each data artifact. And then that was done separately in the 3 organisations. So there was one workshop in Jakarta, one in Washington, another one in Geneva, I think. And then we brought all of the partners together for a final summit workshop in London, where we, by then we had results charts and things interpreted for every organisation. Then we had to bring it together at the programme level across the 3 organisations and come up with findings and recommendations. And that was a 2-day workshop. And the verifiers, external verifiers, were there at all the workshops as well. So we produced a performance story report, the evaluation report out of that, but there was also a separate quality assurance report as well. So these are the data products, if you like, the data artifacts. So 9 deep dive case studies. They were quite long, longer than we expected. And the partners did these, so these were often over 40 pages. And they took one particular initiative and looked at how it influenced policy using either episode studies or a mini performance story report. Also, there was shorter sort of snapshot outcomes reports, about 19, as well as there was 3. We actually looked at value for money of 3 of the case studies, 3 of the 9 deep dives. We extended it into a value for money analysis using the Redstone strategy approach, which was quite interesting. And then we also had to try and pick up some of the failures. We had 9 lessons learnt stories. And then there were the results charts, which is the data synthesis tool. This is where all the outputs and all the data from the M&E framework was collected. So there were 4 of them, 1 for each country and 1 overarching one. Okay, so thinking about what all this added up to, was it worthwhile? Did it meet the need of learning? Well, I think a majority of people did believe that it actually led to learning, and that they learned more from this approach than they would have a traditional approach. So the majority of partners and people we spoke to, we did a little evaluation of the evaluation. ODI did that, felt that it was good, and it did lead to the purpose of learning. But it was, everybody acknowledged, costly and time consuming. It took more time and effort than anybody thought it would. For example, we had to agree on everything. So it took over 6 months to agree just on the terms of reference, as an example. If we did it again, this is very much from my perspective as the evaluation facilitator. The methodology, there were aspects of it which partners really struggled with. And maybe we would try and simplify it, because you have to remember that these partners are not evaluators. So these are practitioners learning how to do an evaluation for the first time. And we didn't do it as a regular evaluation. We did it as collaborative outcome reporting, which is actually supposed to be designed to be done in a way that the adequately prepared practitioner could implement. But they still found it challenging. In particular, the results chart seemed to cause problems for people. So it would allow more time for coordination. And definitely the thing that I've learned from this is that you actually have to spend more time building the capacity of partners. I know it sounds obvious, but you can sort of throw all this stuff out and show people how to do all the component parts. But if they don't know where they're going, if they don't know the overarching process, I think they spent a lot of time questioning why we were doing certain aspects. And in hindsight, definitely would have paid to explain that we were using the core approach, and this is what it was, and this is why we were doing it. Of course, we thought we'd done that because we had built capacity in M&E early on, but I guess you can never do enough of that. Then there's a tension all the way through the program, through the need to tell a story of the overarching KNOWFOR program. So that is that's the three across the three organisations versus the needs of each individual organisation partner to understand the learnings for them. Ultimately, the partners were more interested in learning for their own organisation and less interested in the cross-program evaluation. They felt that the findings got a bit diluted and a bit meaningless once it was across three diverse organisations. And they would say, I think, there's quite a few people who said that they thought it might be more useful if it was done as three evaluations. So, but that would have been the same tension actually for any evaluation, I would argue. Now, the quality assurance role was thought to be useful. However, there was one criticism of it, was that it came in a little late. It was due to the contracting. It didn't start till after the plans had more or less been written. So things were already in train, and perhaps we could have strengthened the methodology if we'd got in there earlier. So that's all I'm going to talk about. I hope that you enjoyed this talk on the KNOWFOR Partner-led evaluation. Please feel free to contact us. And if you want to know more about the collaborative outcomes reporting, you can find out about that on our website. That's Clear Horizon website, or also the Better Evaluation website. Thanks very much, and goodbye.